Hello students, welcome to the subject sociology. Today we are going to talk about Sanskritization and Westernization. Societies are subject to continuous change. Various extraneous and also indigenous factors stimulate change in the entire social system in different forms. The entry of foreigners, missionaries, traders and the Britishers exposed Indians to a new value system and new ideas. Since people started realizing the social restrictions placed on them, they expected a change in their social life. A chain of changes interrelated with one another gradually spread over the Indian scenario. Three processes initiating change were noticed. They are Sanskritization, Westernization and modernization, each process with its own peculiar factors and trends. The castes with different background and positions in the social structure started claiming a better status. This happened through Sanskritization. On the other side of the picture, the introduction of a new technology through industrialization and education by the missionaries and the Britishers opened the path to a new lifestyle by way of Westernization. The vast communication developed with other nations enabled the whole society to progress with the process of modernization. The sources of change could be various factors that operate within and outside the social system. They may be indigenous social factors or exogenous factors like environmental factors, but the consequences will be seen in the socio-cultural spheres. Of all the three types, Sanskritization process emerged from inside the Indian social system itself, and it bears an everlasting influence on the Indian culture. Now, we will see Sanskritization and overview. The influence of Sanskritization on the caste system and the Hindu culture is very significant, but it was very subtle. The caste system, so far considered to be very rigid, exhibited certain obvious changes in the way of life of the non-Brahmins. Indian society, which was based on a closed caste structure, was found to be accommodative to some changes in the hierarchy. The transformation in the cultural life of Indian society due to Sanskritization was enormous. The word Sanskritization, initially termed as Brahminization, refers to a process whereby people of lower castes collectively try to imitate the upper caste practices and beliefs. This they did as a preliminary effort to acquire higher status. M.N. Srinivas describes Sanskritization as the process of mobility of lower castes adopting vegetarianism and teetotalism to move in the caste hierarchy in a generation or two. Later, he redefined it as a process by which a lower caste or a tribe or any other group changes its customs, rituals, ideology and way of life in the direction of a higher and frequently twice born caste. This definition is broader as it includes ideologies like karma, dharma, papa, punya and moksha. A simple meaning of these terms is as follows. Karma, it is the force generated by a person's action held in Hinduism to perpetuate transmigration and in its ethical consequence to determine the nature of the person's next existence. Dharma, in Hinduism, it refers to the individual's duty as per the Shastras. It is moral and religious law governing individual conduct. Papa, it means sin we do by not adhering to the behaviors suggested by Shastras. Punya, punya refers to the activities that allow one to acquire benefits in this and in the next birth. The next one is moksha. Moksha, it means emancipation and liberation. The transcendent state attained as a result of being released from the cycle of rebirth. Sanskritization means exposure of the Sanskritizing caste to the new ideas and values that are expressed in the Sanskritic literature. As explained now, some of the common theological ideas are karma, dharma, papa, punya, maya and moksha. The Sanskritizing caste must accept and understand these ideas by way of myths and stories. For instance, Harikatha, which is religious stories of Hindu gods. Harikatha is a religious storytelling during important religious festivals like Ramanavami and Ganesh Chaturthi. It is believed that listening to Harikatha leads to the acquisition of spiritual merit. But in actual situation, the castes in the lower stratum of the hierarchy emulated the customs and practices of any caste that was dominant in that area. They may be numerically dominant or economically superior to them. Their superiority attracted the lower castes to imitate with an idea to improve their status in their own area. Due to this reason, M. modified the term as Sanskritization instead of Brahminization, as he called it earlier. Apart from the deprivation and suppression under the caste system being causes for Sanskritization, there were some more reasons. The changing political scenario and economic development under the British rule contributed for the process to speed up Westernization. The advent of the Britishers brought great change in the Indian traditional social life, which was different from that of Sanskritization process. Westernization is defined by M. as the changes brought about in the Indian society and culture as a result of over 150 years of British rule, and the term subsumes changes occurring at different levels, that is technology, institutions, ideology and values. Westernization is defined in the Encyclopedia of Britannica as the adoption of practices and culture of Western Europe by societies and countries in other parts of the world, whether through compulsion or influence. As a consequence of Westernization process, the social values get modified towards a new outlook. Certain basic values of Westernization are secularization, equalitarianism, social reforms, humanitarianism and scientific outlook. These values penetrated into the Indian society from various sources. For instance, new Western education that was kept open for all communities taught equalitarianism. The introduction of a legal system with universalistic norms encouraged humanitarianism. Modern technology created a scientific outlook among people. Social leaders who emerged initiated reforms by working against social evils like sati and child marriage practices. Yogendra Singh has observed certain outcomes of Westernization. They are: A. The growth of universalistic legal superstructure. B. Expansion of education. C. Urbanization and industrialization. D. Increased network of communication. And E. Growth of nationalism and politicization of society. The general social system has evinced broader changes that can be pointed out. The education system we will see first. The traditional education system was called Gurukulas, where the students had to learn Hindu Vedas and Shastras under a guru in guru's place itself. Learning was confined to upper castes only. Other castes were denied the privilege of education, but the modern education introduced by the missionaries and later by the Britishers was open to all. The very orientation and the content of new system gave a wider view to the people. It helped people to come out of the caste restrictions and develop the value like equality. The second one is the development of new communication system and technology. Under the British rule, the technological development increased. A communication system totally novel to the Indian life was introduced. The postal, media and transportation systems came for existence, paving way to a new culture. Print media enabled common man, hitherto unfamiliar with national news because of lack of modes, now got familiar with knowledge of the external world and new ideas. The transportation system of railways and road facilitated people to travel to nearby cities for business endeavors and help them improve their financial position. People had to travel in a common train or bus, which made them forget caste restrictions. See, growth of nationalism. People of India till the advent of the Britishers were scattered in different pockets of India with various ideologies. When the process of westernization started in Indian society, the idea of nationalism also started growing. D. Influence on social life. Westernization was the major source of change to influence the social and cultural life of the people. There were tremendous changes in the family structure, marriage practices, religion, food habits and dressing pattern of the people. The joint family system broke into nuclear families. Intercaste marriages became common. Youth, women, government servants and elite groups preferred to dress up similar to that of the Westerners. Rigid and elaborate religious practices got relaxed into simpler ones. E. Changes in value preferences. An important transformation one could find in Indian society is relating to the values they cherished so far. Values on age, sex, family life and travel within and outside India and also human relationships got changed. Interaction between westernization and Sanskritization. Sanskritization and westernization are two different processes in their nature and features, but both the processes pervaded Indian society at a particular point of time. It may appear as if these two processes are highly contradictory, but in actual situation they were happening simultaneously. M.N. Srinivas argues that the acceleration of westernization did not slow down the process of Sanskritization. Both the processes went hand in hand. Sometimes they are expressed in different ways. People also started adopting various methods to cope up with social situations. Some of those coexisting or contradicting values, situations and practices may be discussed here. Technology and tradition. It may be viewed that technology is opposed to tradition, but it was not the situation. Technology was used to promote some religious views. The introduction of new communication system enabled the spread of Sanskritic ideas among the common man. The use of microphone facilitated to reach a large audience and spread religious ideas. Films were made on the lives of saints. Books were published in various vernacular on epics and Puranas. These technologies like press and radio facilitated fast spreading of spiritual thought so far confined to the Brahmins. Added to these technologies, the introduction of transportation system aided changes in caste restriction by making travel rules common to all castes, legal and political systems and tradition. Western political institutions of the British government contributed to the growth of democratic values. These democratic values gave freedom to individuals and groups to think liberally and break the chains of caste system. In legal system also, there was a drastic change from partial to universal. 1. with reference to certain values like equality and prohibition of alcohol. The constitution itself went along with Brahminic values by declaring prohibition to equality of all before law. The caste panchayats lost their importance. Reservation policy and abolition of untouchability and discrimination on the basis of caste brought all equal before law. The next one is reforms and tradition. Reformist movements like Arya Samaj and Brahma Samaj started schools and colleges. These institutions spread traditional and also modern learning among the Hindus. M. Srinivas brings in the context of Punjab here. Reform movements found Indian institutions like slavery, sati and human sacrifice as barbarous. The Britishers and the reformers made all efforts to dispose these practices. Cultural parallelism among the elites. The caste and class from which Indian leaders were born and brought up were also relevant to explain in this context. They preferred to follow tradition and modern values in a parallel manner. Some examples are: the leaders from upper caste who had Western education were opposed to blood sacrifice. But in the case of other customs like widow remarriage and divorce, they were opposed to the British idea. With regard to traditional marital practices, their views were stronger than the lower caste. The educated upper caste found that certain habits and practices of the Britishers were of the same quality that they denounced among the lower castes. Some of those habits may be noted as beef eating, consuming alcohol and liberal sex. The westernized upper caste began acquiring customs and habits that were similar to lower caste people. Those leaders claimed that West as materialistic, whereas Indian culture is spiritual with all these complexity. The form and pace of westernization in India varied from one region to another, from one section of population to another, and also between areas of behavior. For instance, one may use bulldozer in his field and at the same time believe in black magic too. Sanskritization was the mechanism adopted by castes in the rank below to rise up in the caste hierarchy. Simultaneously, the Brahmins found westernization helpful for vertical mobility in the general social system under the British rule. The paradox of likes and dislikes of two sets of behavior always prevailed in India. Practices the Brahmin could follow easily, like education and change of dressing, were overt. Unacceptable habits like meat eating and alcohol consumption, the westernization always remained in a subtle manner. Brahmins and westernization. Response of Brahmins to westernization was unique. In Mysore state, as in many other places, the Brahmins inspired other castes in westernization because they possessed literary tradition from the earlier days. Many of them stood in the top of the rural economic hierarchy as landlords. They grasped the new opportunity opened by the British and migrated to cities like Bangalore. They got the benefits of English education and got into new employment. The scholarly tradition of Brahmins placed them in a favorable position to obtain new employment, but in certain other respects of behavior, the Brahmins were handicapped in the race of westernization. For example, the orthodox Brahmins were hesitant to receive cooked food from others which was polluting to them. They respected the political and economic power of the Englishmen, but at the same time disliked habits like pork eating, drinking and smoking pipe that were considered to be ritually impure. M.N. Srinivas explains how the Brahmins interposed themselves between the British and the rest of the native population. As a result of westernization, a new and secular caste system superimposed the traditional one. Many Kshatriyas stood in the apex of the new westernized organizations, while Brahmins occupied second position and others had to remain in the base of the caste pyramid. Kshatriyas could achieve this higher position by virtue of their political and economic power at disposal. This further complicated the existing system. Milton Singer, author of the book When a Great Tradition Modernizes, makes a theoretical analysis of interaction between India's great tradition of Hinduism and life in the modern cities. While talking about the westernized industrialists in Madras city, he depicts the coexistence of Indian traditional values with modern values. Elites adapt various strategies to their new life without abandoning the traditional practices. For instance, complicated and elaborate rituals are modified to suit modern life. He states that it is not complete elimination of rituals and religion, but an interpretation and restructuring of religious and ethical principles so that it becomes applicable to industrial life. The industrialists may not be able to conduct all rituals that are performed in the traditional culture. In their busy schedules of work, they follow the strategy of abbreviating the rituals to a shorter time to suit their timings. This mechanism he notes as ritual neutralization. They also adapt another strategy of vicarious ritualization, which involves the substitution of a proxy performers of rituals instead of the original performer. Another interesting technique they may follow is compartmentalization, as Milton Singer calls it. These industrialists tactfully mold their behavior to a highly modern way with English language, mannerism and dressing pattern when they are in the office, but they behave like an ordinary Indian at home following traditional Indian life. Compartmentalization in a way is helpful in tactfully differentiating home and office. Flexibility of Hinduism. The flexible nature of Hinduism permits the modern value system to assimilate into itself. The operation of the adaptive mechanism makes possible a kind of cultural metabolism that takes in foreign cultural practices, segregates them, breaks them into usable form and eventually builds them into indigenous cultural metabolism. Yogendra Singh refers to Indian cultural change with three important ramifications: A. Traditional, B. Modern and C. Traditional modern. The intellectuals under the influence of Western culture may be seen in four possible ways: A. Imitative, B. Creative, C. Assimilative and D. Assertive. An important point to understand and agree is Yogendra Singh's view that the concept of the Indian and the Western do not denote the same meaning as in the past. The 19th century or early 20th century picture of Western society is no longer relevant now. We cannot emulate that society today. Our cognition of that context is changing. According to Yogendra Singh, the process of westernization of caste system in India began with the efforts of the missionaries to convert Indians to Christianity. The Britishers brought with them new technology, knowledge, institution and values. These have become main sources of mobility for individuals and groups. M.N. Srinivas and many other sociologists noted that there is continuity between the traditional and westernized areas of culture. The traditional elites like upper caste transformed themselves into new elite group and also there was continuity between old and new occupation. Thus, to conclude, both Sanskritization and Westernization enabled social transformation. Sanskritization was slow and took place in the Indian social structure, especially among the lower caste people, but in the case of Westernization, it happened outside the structure, especially among the upper castes.